cat. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, know about a testimony, and that's a great thing. But actually, this is a little bit different, and so we're gonna kind of look at what's different about it. First of all, the real reason, the justification for this comes from the Bible itself. So we're on solid ground. If you look at 1 Peter 3:15, you don't have to look at it, I will read it. But 1 Peter 3:15, a very important verse. It says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So we are commanded, essentially, to be prepared to give a reason. If someone just comes up to you on the street and says, hey, I see that, sometimes someone might even come to you and say, hey, I think you seem like a Christian to me. I can see something about you. Why do you, or why do you pray, or why do you do this, what is the reason that you believe what you believe? And so we're going to talk about some interesting aspects of that today. So the next thing that I think will very quickly come up for a lot of people at this point is fear. A kind of fear. It makes us very uncomfortable. And the first thing is, maybe I don't have a good reason. I don't feel like I have a good reason. You ask me right now, what's the reason I believe? It's hard to give an answer to that. So maybe the reason I feel like I can't give an answer is because I don't have one. But now that could be the case. Certainly there are people who really don't have a good reason. But I think what's much more likely, especially for you guys sitting here, is that it's something that you haven't necessarily thought of. And I think first of all, this is something that we can all struggle with, and I want to explain it through some examples. So this is something that will sometimes happen. Someone will come up and say, name one reason why this. Name one reason why. And these sorts of situations are very, very troubling. They really put you on edge. Like, you don't want to be caught by someone, putting you on the spot and you not being able to give an answer quickly, especially to something that you feel like you should have an answer for. And you're just like, And some examples of this, if someone were to come up to you and say, hey, you believe in atoms. Why do you think atoms exist? Okay. And like, you're like, yeah, I know atoms exist. I learned all this stuff, but how can I explain that? You might feel like, and just like give one reason why. I can't, give a reason why. Similarly, hey, you think the seasons are based on the tilt of the earth? That's crazy. Why? Give me one reason why you think that. You might be like, okay, yeah, I got to think about this a little bit. Why is it that, and you're not prepared to necessarily give an answer, but these are things that you might believe very deeply. So, ultimately, we're afraid of being caught flat-footed and looking foolish. But we don't have to be. Another good example of this that I think comes up a lot is parents often ask their children, what did you learn at school today? Or what did you do at school today? And the kids are just like, and I think what goes through their mind is like, well, of course a lot of things happened, but what am I supposed to say in this circumstance? I mean, I was there for 8 hours. What's an appropriate answer? Is it good enough to say that Brandon made us laugh in history class? So there's kind of an expectation. And then so they're like, okay, well, to give a really appropriate answer to my parents' question, I'd have to think about it and think, what's the best thing? What kind of answer do they really want? And that's a lot of work, so you know what? I'm just going to say nothing happened. But we don't want to do that, obviously. We want to be a little more thoughtful, and we want to be prepared to give a reason. So there's something that, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, in computer technology. It's called indexing. Your computer will do this where it goes through and at various times it keeps track of where all the files are. And If it doesn't do this, sometimes it fails to have done the indexing, and you ask it, hey, where's that document that I just wrote? And it cannot find it. It's like it's not in the registry anymore. It takes forever for it to find it. But what we're all used to is where you just ask it for whatever it is that you want, and it just shows up immediately. And so I think this is kind of a good analogy for what we're talking about here. We're trying to, you have all this information in you. I believe that most of you do have this information, but we want to be in a position where we can get that out and use it quickly. Like I'm saying, I think probably most of you who have been involved in the church, if you're coming to a session like this, like you've probably heard so many things, and it's just a matter of doing some indexing and thinking about these things, thinking about, hey, what are the strong reasons, giving them a value in your own mind so that you're prepared when these situations come up. So with all that said, let's not be caught flat-footed when we're representing our Lord to the world. When we get put on the spot in that way, let's not be caught flat-footed and look foolish. So, the elephant in the room, at this point, you can start feeling uncomfortable by the fact that, and I wasn't sure how much I wanted to even say this, but the reality of the matter is there are some reasons that are better than others. We have to acknowledge it. Lots of people believe for lots of different reasons, and I'm not in a position of putting down anyone's reasons or anything like that. But there are some that are better than others. If you, an example from everyday life, if someone said that they think the mailman has arrived, that the mailman came earlier because they heard a noise out in front of the house earlier, is that a good reason to believe that the mailman came? Well, it might or might not be, depending on what kind of noise they heard. Depending on a lot of their background knowledge, that might be an okay reason, but also could it have been something else they heard in the neighborhood? So, of course, we want to just be careful in assessing all of the reasons as we go through this to ourselves. Yes, some are better than others. We don't have to say that they're all equally the same. If we did, I feel like a lot of people feel like we have to say everything's the same because otherwise that would be judgmental. And regardless of anything, I'm not interested in judging anyone, but maybe this is the first time people have thought about it in this way. What are the good reasons and what are some other reasons? Now, this discomfort that we feel, the idea of being put on the spot and all that discomfort and us feeling like we may not have the best reasons, that should spur us to do the right thing, to figure out, what are the reasons, to actually do the work. Don't let that just, okay, I'm just going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore that feeling. I'm going to ignore those situations. I'm going to hope no one asks me. That's not the best response. So think of it like pain or shame. When we feel pain, that is to get us to avoid that sort of problem. And then shame, we don't want to do something bad that will result in us feeling shame. And similarly, we don't want to hurt ourselves and feel pain. Pain is a way to keep us from damaging our bodies. Okay, so that the discomfort, the fact that it's discomfortable is not in and of itself an excuse. Now, with that said, it is not entirely objective what reasons. So it's not the case that everyone should have the exact same reasons to believe. Now, some are strong and may be shared by many people. That's fine, but the ones that are convincing to you may not be the same that are convincing to everyone else. And this is about finding the reasons for a belief that are most convincing to you personally, based on your situation, your experience. So some of these may be very personal. It might have to do with your background. It might have to do with your life experiences. It might have to do with something, a way that you feel that God spoke to you or something like that. Those are absolutely legitimate. Now, these sorts of personal reasons do have a weakness, and that is something that I think, obviously you sense when you think about some of these reasons. We say, hey, there's something about these that is not quite the same as other reasons. So I'm going to tell you what that is, but it is not something which should completely disqualify them or make them look down on or irrelevant. They should not be seen as inherently less than other types of reasons we'll talk about. And in fact, they are, in a way, they're beautiful because they have a foundation in a person's real life and their experiences, and that can be a beautiful thing, and that can actually add a lot of flavor to it. And when you share with someone, it can be very nice to have sort of colorful thing. We love these sorts of examples of, hey, I like hearing someone's life experience. This is their background. Lee Strobel, we talk about Lee Strobel was an atheist writer, and he went through this situation of trying to disprove God, and then he found from evidence that God was real. And he went on to write books about it and things. So these things can be very cool. And here we're going to look at an example. This is Cynthia's example of her pat. Now, there's some structure here. I think this is a cool structure. You can do the structure or you can choose to do it a different way. But just looking at her example and talking about some of the personal reasons. So she talks about how she is a medical doctor, and because of her life experience, she's done autopsies. She feels like she's seen death, and that through that experience, she realizes how we all die, and that this life is fleeting, that rot is unavoidable. You may have to get the better explanation from her, but I think I'm paraphrasing it fairly well. And then with knowing that we are all going to die, that leads her to say, why am I here? There's an afterlife. What's really important for me to be doing with the limited time that I have? So then she goes to a more like objective science component, talking about from science. It can't just be chance. There's too much complexity, and she's got some of her favorite examples. You can ask her about this later. About the beginning is a common one, but one of her favorites is chirality, talking about a chemistry concept and complexity, and then the sense that there is something beyond. That it's kind of trippy when you start thinking about that sort of thing, but here we are now, but there's certainly more to this reality than just this. So then she says, she kind of summarizes all that into a package that says, hey, this is the best fit with reality. If you look at the weight of the evidence, it's very rational and reasonable to believe that there is God, and that Jesus is his son. So that is one very cool example. Some other examples, I've seen this a lot in my experience. People with an engineering background are very often convinced by the design in the universe. They just see, it's hard to overlook when, if you've gone through the process of making something complex and understanding all the steps, and then you see that the things that we make are so much more feeble than what's actually happening in nature, and the complexities of even the fine-tuning of physics. Any sort of thing like this, you realize that this sort of organized complexity doesn't just happen by itself. So I will say here that scientists may have it a little bit easier than people with other backgrounds. I do think that might be true, but I also think that people, regardless of your background, like for example, in the arts, I think there are sorts of arguments from beauty, and to articulate these, it's maybe a little difficult for me, but maybe that's just because of my background. I do think that there is something about the beauty in the universe which is far beyond what we would expect just if we were molecules in motion. And that could get into things like music as well. So the weakness of these personal sorts of things, inherently it's not a weakness of them itself. The problem is that they are not relatable to everyone. The problem is that you can't just go to anyone and expect them to share your background and experience and understand what it is about that that's important to you. So some recommendations about how to deal with that. So you can, we want to include these personal reasons in our personal apologetics, but we need to just keep in mind their relatability and the situation that we're in. So some tips on this is that you can take a simple, you can take your whole life experience and try to put it down into boil it down into a small part that is simple and relatable. So look, I mean, we're not medical doctors, but this idea of this one aspect of her experience, the experience of seeing the dead, and this part we can understand. So this was part of what Cynthia did with her approach, is you can take some of your life experiences and take the parts that are relatable, and you can say those. Or another thing, and I do this pretty frequently, is you can just briefly say it. So for example, I think the prophecies are some of the best, personally, I think they're some of the best reasons to believe and be a Christian. But in order to really appreciate them, that can be very difficult. You won't even really understand some of the prophecies until you've read them, probably many times, maybe knowing whole other chapters and things about the Bible. So you won't have time to explain all that necessarily, but you can say, just so you know, personally, the thing that's most convincing to me is the prophecies. I think that if I were, a big part of the reason I'm a Christian is the prophecies. And that people can at least accept that for what it is. You're giving them your experience. They can think about that as they go forward. It's not going to change their life necessarily, but if you couch it in that way, it is at least of some value. Another example that you could say, man, when I read the Gospels, the way that Jesus talks, it shows that he has authority, that he is the Son of God. The Gospels even say that. They talk about how people were amazed as he was one who spoke with authority, not like the other teachers of the law. And I feel the same way when I read the Gospels. So now we're getting into the idea of knowing versus showing. The difference between knowing for yourself, what are the proofs and reasons that are convincing, and then what are the things that you can use to show someone else. So the stuff about prophecy and the authority of Jesus, these are things that really help me know that it's true, but it may be difficult to use that to show someone. And so this is where we can get into the idea of different paths, different personal apologetic testimonies. They don't all have to be the same. You can have one that is just about you knowing what really proves to me that this is true. And then you can have other ones that are dedicated to showing that to others. So it doesn't have to be just one, but it is good to have one or maybe several ready for showing when someone comes and asks you, hey, what would you generally respond? And then you can tailor that depending on the situation, depending on the audience, depending on the person that you're talking to. You may want to say, hey, this is one of the reasons why I think, even if it's your number 3, you may say it first because you're talking to this type of person. And then how much time do you have? Some of the things about prophecy you're not going to be able to explain unless you have a lot of time with this person. Other things you might be able to explain if you're, I've had conversations, you're talking for an hour. It might be worth 20 minutes to kind of unpack a certain idea. So I know this may sound like making lists and memorizing, but it does not have to be that. It can be much more simple. Ultimately, just trying to look at what are the reasons, which are the good ones, and then just keeping that in your mind. And it doesn't have to be like 1, 2, 3, 4. But it can be. If that's useful for you, then absolutely do it. But just keeping some good reasons to be a Christian at your fingertips is what we're talking about. It can be very helpful. So here's a proposed solution for how you could actually practically do this. First of all, you go through the process of looking at some of these reasons. And you try to ask the question, what are the things that really make me believe personally? And here we're in the category of knowing. So you do this assessment, and this is the majority of the work. Just figuring out which reasons are good and which things that you've heard that may not be good. You may find that, hey, some of these things that I've heard, since Sunday school, they're not really as compelling, or at least they're not as good as some other reasons. Then from those, you can just identify which ones are not relatable in whatever situation you're in, and then you don't give those. So, like I was saying, for me, prophecy I think is amazing, but I usually will not give it because I think that it requires a little bit of explanation. But if someone has some of that background, that might be a totally different situation. Or I might just say, hey, to me, this is like the number one reason, but you may not understand that, or you may not appreciate that. And then, of course, the third step, so we said, number one, what are the things that make me believe personally? Number two, identifying things which the audience may not be able to relate to. This is in the category of showing. Number three, how much time do I have with this person? If I have more time, I might be able to unpack some more ideas. Okay, so that's kind of some background about what it is, why it is, and all these sorts of thoughts about it. It's probably been a lot to take in. I understand that. But now let's talk quickly about some different types of reasons why you might believe. So this is not an exhaustive list. There are many, many more than this, but some that come to mind. Personal experience. Absolutely don't want to discount people's personal experience. Some people have had even profound experiences like dreams and things, but even other experiences that are less miraculous should have some value, should be given some meaning, even if they're not something that you can relate to someone else. Arguments from the resurrection of Jesus Christ are very powerful. If you look into this, I think there are very good reasons to believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead. If you want more information about this, I would recommend the work by Gary Habermas and by Mike Licona. Also, this may not be relatable, but actually I think it is relatable. It only gets difficult once people start coming back with arguments. Oh, well, that's not. Oh, it was all hallucination. Oh, it was the tomb. They stole the body. Then it can get very complicated giving responses to these. But if you look into it, these are absolutely powerful reasons to believe and to be a Christian. I already mentioned prophecy quite a bit, so I'll not talk about that one as much. Design. The design that we see in the universe, a very powerful reason. I think for me it would probably be either number one or two. The complexity that we see, it's not easily explainable, especially from an atheistic worldview. Various philosophical arguments, arguments about the beginning. So Cynthia mentioned this as one of hers. This would be a type of philosophical argument about how could something begin without a cause? You get into these sorts of discussions. And so these are absolutely good reasons to believe. I also mentioned about the authority. So the authority with which Jesus spoke is, I think, a kind of evidence in and of itself. And also the fact that his morality was ahead of his time. I think that nowadays you'll find very few people who will dispute almost anything that Jesus said. Maybe here and there you'll find some, but mostly everyone will say, wow, he was an amazing teacher. And especially when you consider the context in which these things were said, It's very hard to explain how that would happen if he were not the Son of God who he claims to be. Also, of course, miracles. Some people have had miracle experiences, seen miracle experiences. That would absolutely be evidence. Now, it's also in this category of evidence which may not be something you can't just tell someone, oh, I saw a miracle, and have them necessarily believe you. But it is evidence. So, trying to wrap up here. So, in kind of wrapping things up and giving you the charge, number one, you should do this for others. So we talked about how you're commanded to do this in 1 Peter, to have reasons for the hope that's in you. You are a light, and God does not want you under a bushel. You should be letting your light shine. And so this is going to be one of the benefits of coming up with your list of reasons, is so that you can let your light shine and quickly tell people when they ask you. But secondly, do it for yourself. So this is in the category of knowing, so that you can know. Now, some people have what I consider to be a backwards attitude here. Is, we can agree to disagree, I guess. I don't know if any of you. But some people can have a backwards attitude and say, I have strong faith. I don't need reasons. They look down on people who look into having a solid foundation and having good reasons. And I consider this to be kind of an ostrich mentality. And I've seen people like this leave the faith. So let me say to them, show me your faith without good reasons, and I will show you my faith founded on good reasons. And this is a requote of James. It's a bit of a tweak on what James says. It's not exactly the same, but I think it's very appropriate here. So, and finally, and just trying to explain some of the reasons why this is important. I think the grass is always greener on the other side. We've seen a lot of people who leave the faith for really kind of frivolous reasons. They grow up knowing all this stuff, but they don't really take it into account and what's important, what are good reasons and what are not. And then they run into one thing that kind of oh, I don't know how to understand that, or I think there's a problem here. And then they leave the faith altogether. For example, morality, if you were to leave Christianity, think about this, you would really need a whole new set of morality. You would need to have a new justification for a completely different way of looking at it. And people don't really understand how all of these pieces fit together. So I'm encouraging people to be more thoughtful about the way their worldview works. But people will just leave because they think there's a problem in one passage, or they don't like a certain morality that the Bible teaches, and they'll keep their morality and move on. But this is not a rational way to do it. So we want to encourage being confident and being rational. So take inventory of everything you know and account for it. If anyone were to leave the faith, I would want them to take inventory of it. What are the reasons? If you were to do that, you would have to explain everything. We just want you to live in a way that gives the best explanation, and we believe that Christianity is the best explanation. And if you look into these things, then you will become more confident in that way of believing. But that is not what people generally do. So just one final thing as kind of an idea. You don't necessarily have to have this all done right now. But I would say that as you go on through your life and you encounter different things, you're going to go on and you're going to hear people say things. Assess them. Even the Bible says, weigh the things, weigh the spirit, test the spirits, see which is good and which is bad. So as you go forward, test the things that you encounter. Say which are really strong reasons, which are maybe less strong reasons. And when you find something good, add it to the list. So I think that hopefully that helped change the way you might think about some of these things. I probably gave a lot of crazy concepts, maybe a little too fast, but I hope at least some of that will help change the way you think